what we started last night. I'm going to continue with what we started last night. And if you weren't here for Vespers, part one will be uploaded today. So both parts will be on YouTube. So we're going to continue on where or just pick up. I'll do a little bit of review, but pick up where we left off. Let me just get the share screen up. And you let me know that you can see the slideshow when it comes up. I think you can see it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, good. Um, so I wanted to maybe say, based on the feedback last night, it just say that I have actually not completed the essays. I think there's 88 or 89 of them. I've read probably about a third of them, but it was in reading more than one that I was able to kind of glean a greater understanding of what it was they were arguing for many different angles. This is number 10 is just one angle that's stuck out to focus on. I thought it would be one that would be most easiest to relate to what we're actually learning today. So that was my purpose. But I would say if we really want to understand it, if you're interested in it, if we really want to understand it, it would probably take reading more than one of them. Was somebody going to say something?
No, sorry, that was me coughing. I'll mute.
Okay. So it would be more beneficial if you do want to understand it more, who the Federalists are, who the Anti-Federalists are, what about the Articles of Confederation that the Constitution was replacing, who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. You really get a better understanding by reading more of them. But I hope that what we finish with today helps a little bit more when we go into some articles that were posted in the media broadcast that I found very helpful to line up with all of this. So we looked at um, some of Elder Parmenter's, or a couple of Elder Parmenter's presentations where he discussed the Constitution as being above everything, and that it was even above law, that the law was subservient to the Constitution. And we also just referenced briefly the study of Acts 27, and that the ship of Alexandria, that even Ellen White writes that that was the good ship, and that it was that this we know that the sixth kingdom is it is has two horns like a lamb. Did I say that right? Yeah, two horns like a lamb, but not a lamb. So there is something that is good about it. And when I think I mentioned last night as well that when it comes to the good woman, that was a puzzling thing to me for a while because I thought that the good woman had to be there in order to set up a system that was good. But what we've come to understand is that these kingdoms, as stated in Revelation 17, they are the kingdoms of the earth. They're not God's kingdom, they're the kingdoms of the earth. They're not Satan's kingdom, but they are the kingdoms of the earth. So, but kingdoms are meant to do a work of protection of the people and provisions for the people, etc. It's supposed to be good for the common good of all. And so, something in this was being done right in order for it to be the ship of Alexandria. So if with that in mind, we'll continue on with Federalist number 10. The focus on number 10 was what he was talking about was a faction, and we can understand a faction as a group of people that might have a similar cause, but he specified a particular cause that stuck out at me, that this particular cause, this particular faction was one that was adverse to the rights of other citizens, is the way he wrote it. And the way I understand that to mean is if you're adverse to the rights of other citizens, you're not necessarily adverse to your own rights. So there's the issue of my rights versus your rights in this discussion that he's having, and he's talking about can you remove it? What do you do? He said you can't remove it because it would go against the actual liberty that the whole Constitution is supposed to be establishing. And the Constitution, for anybody that wasn't here, another quick reminder, the Articles of Confederation were the first Constitution, and they were found to be weak when it came to central government. So the Constitution was to put in place a stronger central government and bring the states all in agreement together in alignment. But the anti-federalists we saw believe that the Constitution makes the president a king and would take us right straight into tyranny, which we just fought to get away from a king in England. So there's this clashing view, and trying to sift through to understand what is being done right, what is being done wrong, it really requires reading a few more at least of these essays to try to understand it, and plus the dynamics of the people at that time, where whatever their education may be, whatever their level of understanding, we understand that you don't have social media going around with throwing information out at you everywhere. But your own worldview is going to be shaped by your particular experience in life. And so it could be a very narrow worldview or a very broad view. And we talked briefly about the Civil War when it came to the narrative that was fed to the people in the South was that they had the right, they were being denied their right, their constitutional right to secede from the Union. And as Lincoln stated to them in this argument, that even if it were legal for you to secede from the Union, it had to be consensual. Thus, the implication that the people did not know, and they were making a decision based on false information, because what the South or the elite of the South really wanted, what they were really fighting for, was they didn't want anybody telling them they could not own human beings to enslave them for their own prosperity. So the issue of states' rights and individual rights early on was fought for, and in a compromise, James Madison wrote the Bill of Rights, and they were added in order to get the Constitution ratified. So hopefully that was a fair summary of so far. So we just have a few more slides on Federalist number 10, and then we're going to go into a couple of articles, like I said, from the media broadcast. So he says it is in vain to say that enlightened statesmen will be able to adjust to these clashing interests and render them all subservient to the public good. Enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm, nor in many cases can such an adjustment be made at all without taking into view indirect and remote considerations, which will rarely prevail over the immediate interest which one party may find in disregarding the rights of another or the good of the whole. The inference to which we are brought, so he's kind of given a little bit of, it's not really his conclusion because he's going to go on to a few more things, but he's going to sum up, can we get rid of the cause? So the inference which we are brought is that the cause of faction, get rid of your liberty, take away your liberty, or have us all be of one same mind, like George Orwell, 1984, so is that the causes of faction cannot be removed, and that the relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effects. I put the bold in there, but I didn't put the caps in there, just so you know. The caps were his doing. So if a faction consists of less than a majority, I thought this was a very key to what we're looking at today, the reality of today. If a faction consists of less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. And keep in mind, he has defined faction specifically, where you could have, like I said, many different factions, but he's put a specific definition to what he's targeting, and that is a group of people that are adverse to the rights of other citizens. So if it consists of less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. It may clog the administration, it may convulse the society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. What does he mean by mask? If anybody wants to give a thought of what might mask infer. If anybody wants to comment on that.
Deception?
Say that again. Yeah, deception. Is that what we said? Deception?
Yes.
Yes. So that it's hidden. And who do we know is the one that does things in deception and in the dark and hidden? Anybody wants to answer that one?
Talking about like Satan?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a work that goes on hidden. So when it comes to cause and effect, you don't necessarily see what the effect is going to be. And the writer of this essay is giving us a glimpse in my understanding, is giving a glimpse at what is going on in a hidden dark manner, in deception. So when a majority is included, so that was a minority, you can vote and do away with it, they would not be able to proceed. When a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passions or interests both the public good and the rights of other citizens. To secure the public good and private rights against the danger of such a faction, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed. So how do you keep, and there's more slides that talk about this, how do you keep this majority from coming into power, is what I'm saying. And remember his strict definition that he is writing about is a group of people that are adverse to the rights of other citizens. So by what means is this object attainable? Evidently, by one of two only. Either the existence of the same passion, this is when you have a majority, either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, so prevent this majority from happening, or the majority having such coexistent passion or interest must be rendered by their number and local situation unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. We, during the morning prayer meetings and vespers, as we were looking at this, we're looking at various words to try to understand what he's saying, and we're looking at schemes as one of them. Scheme might be like a plan, but a plan doesn't have to necessarily be good or bad. It's what you attach to it. And he is talking about this being schemes of oppression, which in my understanding fits with his definition of a faction, that there is a faction based on a group of people that are adverse to the rights of other citizens, which means that you're going to have rights and you're going to oppress others. So he's saying you have to try to make it to where they're unable to carry out their schemes. If the impulse and opportunity be suffered to coincide, we well know that neither moral nor religious motives can be relied on as an adequate control. They are not found to be such on the injustice and violence of individuals, and lose their efficacy in proportion to the number combined together. That is, in proportion as their efficacy becomes needful. So if you look back at the experience with religion in the 1260, and what religion actually did, is it going to be helpful? So that's how I understood that. There may be more depth to that, but when he points out, religion, trying to rely on religion to try to help this, that wasn't going to have adequate control. From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will in almost every case be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or the obnoxious individual. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Theoretic politicians who have patronized these species of government have erroneously supposed that by reducing humanity, to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would at the same time be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their possessions, their opinions, and their passions. He's going to do side by side of democracy, a pure democracy versus a republic. And we understand a republic to be a government set up, as in the preamble says, we the people. And we're going to look at a video in a few minutes about Nazi Germany and where it was their purpose to destroy the Weimar Republic. So a republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens this representation is supposed to be of all the people. And well, I think I neglected to mention in the review, we do fully well understand that slavery is taking place, and the framers and these back in that time still had slaves. Their focus was on monarchy, not recognizing that they still yet had their own log in their eye that needed to be dealt with. So this is the United States in its infancy, which was meant to grow and mature. So a republic, by which I mean a government. Okay, let's see. Let us examine the points in which it varies from pure democracy, and we shall comprehend both the nature of the cure and the efficacy which it must derive from the Union as opposed to the Articles of Confederation, where the states were individual and sovereign. Two great points of difference between a democracy and a republic are, first, the delegation of the government, in the latter to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. Secondly, the great number of citizens and greater sphere of country over which the latter may be extended. So you're going to have a small group of citizens elected by all of the rest. So now we're going to look at two articles. This one here, we only have one paragraph that I took out of this particular article on Trump's Board of Peace, and I'm going to say that I struggled to sleep last night, and I read a few articles that I still need to read in the media broadcast, and the one on the World Health Organization and what he's doing there. We can see him taking the steps of conquering the world, where we understand in Daniel 11:41, where he seeks to conquer the world and rule the world. And if anybody remembers, Elder Tess gave us the definition of Donald a long time ago, meant ruler of the world, I believe. So this was from his Board of Peace, would have global scope, but with one man in charge. The initiative is the latest example of the president's dismantling the post-World War II international system and building a new one with himself at the center. And it seems that after reading that article on the World Health Organization, he's doing the same thing with that as well. So you might want to speak up if you need to say something, since I'm it's harder for me to see the chat when I have it on the full screen like this. Okay, so this is his Board of Peace, from this Board of Peace article. But many officials and experts in international affairs were stunned by the breadth of the initiative, the latest example of Mr. Trump taking apart the American-built post-World War II in an international system and building a new one with himself at the center. This is a direct assault on the United Nations, and gives you his name of who's done that. And he says this initiative is likely to be seen as a takeover of the world order by one individual in his own image. The takeover of the world order by one individual. Globally, just like when you look at the United States and their issue of union or the 13 sovereign states, in having their individual states' rights, the Union made them stronger. And that was the goal and the purpose in the Constitution, was for the Union to make them stronger. So if there are several of the essays that are written on when it comes to standing armies and the arguments given for that, because both sides had their arguments for why you should have a standing army, why you should not, why you should just rely on the states at the time when you need them, and the arguments as to why that wouldn't work. So if you want to try to protect the people of the United States as a whole, then you need to work together. So you take that globally. If you want to be able to work together with the people of the world to help the whole, then you have to actually work together. So this globalization came about through the United Nations and throughout and after World War II and going on into being developed, that the nations would work together globally for the safety of the whole. Go
Can I
ahead.
make a brief comment? I was just thinking how the union is very much like a marriage, or what, right? Because the states needed consent in order to secede. It was you could see equality if it was balanced correctly, where no one patriarchal power would have dominance if it stayed within balance. But you can see the marriage hasn't stayed within balance, right? It's unequal. And I was just kind of thinking that out with our equality message and the way patriarchy operates, and how the union was supposed to be balanced to bring about that equality for all, if it stayed within, you know, well, equal means. Anyhow, I was thinking about that. But the problem is the faction that we were warned about, right? The one that wanted their own rights over anyone else's. That kind of mentality has
Yes.
taken over, we
Yes.
see. Yeah.
And so he goes on to say, Mr. Weller goes on to say, the peace negotiations specialist, Mr. Weller, the peace negotiations specialist, argued that the expected $1 billion contributions could further sap funding from the United Nations, whose agencies, the United Nations agencies, were told by the United States in December that they need to adapt, shrink, or die. And this was the second article that I included into this, a little bit more, a few more quotes in this one than I did in the first one. So America's drift toward constitutional authoritarianism. Trump has shown how democracy can be neutralized without being destroyed, using the law in order to further your purpose. What unites these episodes is not ideology alone, but method. Trump has governed as if sovereignty resides not in institutions, laws, or alliances, but in the personal discretion of the executive, meaning the executive branch, or more direct, the president. Legal frameworks become instruments rather than constraints. So using the system as it is to do it. Domestic oversight becomes conditional. Power is exercised openly, justified retrospectively, and normalized through repetition. This is not a dictatorship in the classic sense. It is something more elusive and in many ways more durable and harder to reverse. Modern authoritarianism does not announce itself with tanks in the streets or the suspension of constitutions. It advances through law, procedure, and administrative control. It preserves elections while narrowing contestation, maintains courts while encouraging deference, and invokes democracy even as it drains it of pluralist substance. It is within this context that the Trump administration's 2025 national security strategy must be read, not as a routine foreign policy document, but as the clearest doctrinal expression yet of a deeper transformation already underway. using the system to develop into this authoritarianism. Strategy documents rarely inaugurate political change. More often, they codify it. They take practices that have been improvised, normalized, and tested across institutions and elevate them into principle. In this sense, the NSS does not mark a departure in American statecraft so much as a moment of self-recognition. At home and abroad, into an explicit theory of power. Presented as a doctrine of national renewal, the strategy invokes the language of strength, sovereignty, and restoration. So he's focusing on, you've got all this global work that's been developed over many years to work together for the greater good of all, and the UN being that representation of that. And now he wants to break away from all that. And just like in the Civil War, you give them a false narrative that you're being denied some right. You have the right to be sovereign. You're the United States. You have the right to be sovereign. You don't have to be a part of this global structure. You have the right. And so you get this idea that your rights are being denied. So it depicts a world fractured by great power rivalry, cultural contestation, and systemic vulnerability. And it argues that the United States must reclaim strategic autonomy, economic resilience, and civilizational confidence to prevail. So I see it as the same argument, again, back in the Civil War. A false narrative is being given to the people. And there are those that have been sounding the alarm. I'll say it the way as it applies to me, that I see how they have been sounding this alarm while I was being this good, faithful, obedient Christian, conservative Christian, and not looking at the various things that people were actually being fed, whether it be through the news, through the TV, Hollywood shows and such as that. They might bring one up later. So on its surface, it resembles an assertive attempt to reorder United States engagement with an unsettled international system. Read more closely, however, and in light of the governing practices that preceded it, and the NSS reveals something more consequential. It does not merely catalog threats abroad, it reframes nearly every domain of American public life: economic policy, migration, industrial capacity, technology, culture, and identity, as part of a continuous national security terrain. In doing so, it expands executive discretion across areas that were historically insulated from national security logic. What emerges is not only a vision of the United States' place in the world, but a theory of domestic power, one that elevates sovereignty above pluralism, unity above disagreement, and security above democratic restraint. The NSS crystallizes a trajectory that is already visible in American politics: the rise of a form of constitutional authoritarianism. So claiming to be within the confines of the Constitution, and going back to that, if we get there, I have a slide that shows the unitary principle, the principle under the Constitution. So hopefully we'll get to that. So this form of rule does not dispense, in the unitary being where the executive has all this power, and that's not what the Constitution was meant to do.
You mean the unitary executive theory? That was like a rogue theory, considered to be really radical.
Yes. And it definitely has the president as king. So this form of rule, this constitutional authoritarianism, this form of rule does not dispense with elections, courts, or legislatures. It subordinates them. The architecture remains, the meaning shifts. Democratic norms are preserved precisely so they can be invoked as their operation is steadily reconfigured and control over them increasingly centralized. So they're using the legal system to do this. They've presented and I don't know if present is the right word, but they like as in the Civil War, they've shared a narrative that the United States needs to be sovereign, and that going back to again individual rights or being personal individual rights are being challenged. And so they see it as a threat and as a fear, therefore they go along with it because we understand the people are collateral damage. And you could go back to 1798 or 87 when this argument was taking place. And what is the condition of the people? What is the education level of the people? What is the information they are being fed? And if you're not widely informed or widely read, you're not going to understand correctly the issues that are taking place. And you could fall into the deception that is being presented out of what this faction that he was describing in Federalist number 10. You could fall into that and not even know it.
Elaine, Elaine, Jackie,
Yes.
I was thinking about the news sources. Of course, they have to change the narrative, of what's coming out of the local or the news that we are used to hearing. And this is happening very, very rapidly now. CNN was just sold out to David Adelson, I think his name is, and his son, and they are buying up the networks. And now they're going to control the major networks for the narrative that they want to get out there to the people. So that has to go along with it because, people that listen to the news, it's not, and it's very subtle, like you said. It's not.
It's not as subtle now, but now we're seeing it
more.
We're seeing the fruit of it. Because it has been subtle, but it began way back where, as Elder Tess pointed out, when you had the 1989 to 9/11 or 2001 in the formalization, where it was in the formalization where CNN and Fox News were put on the line, if you remember that.
Yes.
So it's been going on at a pace that wasn't noticed. So I will bring up, I brought it up yesterday morning, TV program that I watched. Like I said, we were all good Christians, not watching TV or any of that, but watched this one called The Newsroom. And maybe some of you have heard of it because I know I'd run across a clip from it a few times in the past. And I didn't realize this is where this clip was from. But it's the actor Jeff Daniels, and they're in this I don't know what you call it. I'm not that educated. Is a symposium? Is that what you call it? Where you have people up on a panel and they're asking questions and answering questions. Anyways, he is a news in the program. He's a news anchor. One of your big network news anchors is the role that he plays, and he doesn't give his political affiliation in all that he does, and he's always being questioned about it, and he doesn't give it, and so they're kind of pushing at him to do this. And then this one student, college student, stands up, and it's her turn to ask a question, and she asks him, what would, with a smile on her face, what would you say is great about the United States or America, however she answered it. And he sat there kind of silent for a second, and then he just goes off on this tirade about how bad the United States is. And it kind of, that becomes part of the story as you go through it. But the program itself, then they get to where they start wanting to do real news, real truth, real facts, super sourced, and feed out the truth, even though it's unpopular. So they cover in the show many of the events that were real life happening, and up into as well the 2012 election. So I thought it was really interesting that while I'm being this good, conservative Christian, I don't watch TV, I don't do any of that stuff. This is what people were being fed, and it went on for like 3 seasons and then ended. But there are other programs that do this, that there are other programs that have been speaking this to people that maybe they would see. And then you move a little forward, you get into, you start being labeled woke when you when you take on such views. So continuing on this in this article, to understand this process, the United States must be situated within a broader global pattern. Modern authoritarianism rarely arrives through rupture. It advances through law, procedural regularity, and the creative reinterpretation of constitutional powers. What is that creative reinterpretation? I think it was Susan that said the unitary, I don't remember how you say it, the unitary
Executive
Yeah.
theory. It was
So
introduced by William Barr.
yes.
Barr.
So it's a creative reinterpretation of constitutional powers. And the way I interpret that is that the Constitution, and even Elder Parmenter had demonstrated this in his presentation that he did on the 14th Amendment, that if the Constitution is above all and the law is subservient to the Constitution, you have beneath the Constitution. The Constitution represents in my understanding, I'm slow at understanding, but I'd say in my understanding, it's these basic principles that were supposed to be a guide. If you look at it as the ship of Alexandria, this guide would then, but beneath that, the structure of the government would all go within that guide that was established. So you have beneath that, you have Congress or the House and the Senate, you have the executive branch and everything that goes within that. And then you have the judicial branch, and they were all subservient to the Constitution. So they want to.
That's also really interesting in light of what you brought out yesterday with the preamble and how that was the key. And that but think about it, because not like you've just brought out that the factions that want only their rights over others, right? They're not embodying justice for all, liberty, blessings of liberty for all, right? They're not embodying the principles of the Constitution, because the policies usually are made from your principles. You have a foundational principle belief, and with that in place, then the policies are supposed to be made with that in mind always. But you can see how that has been ignored.
Yes. I'm kind of going back through a little bit with Gloria's post. I'm trying to look at the chat every now and then, but where she's posted the key points regarding the purpose. And I think you're talking about Federalist number 10, correct? Rejection of direct democracy. The essay argues that small democracies are prone to being controlled by a single faction, majority tyranny, whereas a republic with elected representatives filters public opinion. I lost my thought. I had a thought to add to that. Because I don't remember which numbers it was, essays 19, 20, 21, somewhere in there. It actually goes back in I don't remember which author it is, if it's Hamilton or Madison on this one, but it goes through the history of ancient Greece and how Greece had a similar structure as to the Articles of Confederation, and showed through several examples in history in Greece, that this similar structure of Articles of Confederation, where the states are sovereign or the cities are sovereign, there's no central government, that and takes it from cause to effect, always ending up in tyranny and oppression. So I do say, if you want to know more about it, it's better to read more than just the highlights of number 10 that I pulled out to help us have a broader view of what was happening. Okay, so go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so since they didn't like the Greece model, they used the Roman model.
Okay, the Republic, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and that's why we have that Roman symbol in the Congress that's behind the Speaker of the House.
The fasciae.
Yeah.
The bundle of rods. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So they're using this creative reinterpretation of constitutional powers. It spreads by example with leaders learning from one another, and it thrives in systems where formal democratic institutions remain intact even as their capacity to constrain power steadily erodes. What appears from the outside as a familiar constitutional order is from within slowly being rewired. I'm trying to, as you brought that up, Kathy, I'm trying to, I have such a bad memory. I said last night I got the eraser that follows behind me. The book that I read on the Civil War, because it goes into that history of the period of time where it covers a lot of histories, but in that particular history where Rome was a republic and how they had the Senate and everything set up.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
in that in that author's in his book, he goes through and takes you to how they wound up being an empire. And it was through civil wars, and it gives you depictions of who was actually instigating and bringing upon these, and it was a return to oppression. So
And America was so happy to become an empire in its early life, right?
I don't know
1812,
if
the
I see it
Monroe.
that way, but I
Yeah.
don't know if I see it that way. I see it as a republic that was meant for all the people, and it's now an empire. That's how I see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it didn't, it started early in its history. Like I think 1812 is, or 1802 is the Monroe Doctrine, and then the
I
Manifest Destiny and all of that. So, I mean, it's inbuilt in the early
yes.
days.
Yes, and my understanding is he's identifying the cause in this faction that is adverse to the rights of other citizens, because Constitution was supposed to be supportive of the whole. And
Yes.
again, it's hard to remove our blinders and say, well, we've got to ignore slavery right now because that's still existing. We aren't there yet. We have a ways to go to understand it. But you had this faction of people with enlightened passions, and liberty allows for that believed in their rights above the rights of others. And so it was something it's like a boil that continues to, is that how you say that? That continues to fester until it eventually explodes. And that's how I personally see it. Um, so it was a process that got us to where we are today. But nonetheless, we see number 6 is different and distinct from number 7, and that number 6 makes up the ship of Alexandria, the good ship, and
So
that was the
number
protector and
7 would,
defender.
oops, sorry. Oops,
Mhm.
I cut you off.
Go ahead.
So the 7th would be the masked power
Would
because
be
it
the what?
masks the
Oh, the
masking.
masking.
Yeah,
Yeah, yes. They
because
worked
it
in
was not,
secrecy.
yeah, it was, and it makes me think of Ellen White's quote that the
Yes,
Sunday movement is working in darkness or something to that
yes,
effect.
yes,
Masking,
yes. It was
deception.
hidden through
Yep.
deception. So to understand this process, the United States must be situated with a broader global pattern. Modern authoritarianism rarely rise through rupture. I guess I just read all that, right? So we're ready to go to the next one. Okay. So the most illuminating framework for understanding this phenomenon remains that articulated by legal theorist Ernest Frankl in his analysis of Nazi Germany, the dual state. In Frankel's account, an authoritarian system can preserve a normative state, courts, procedures, legality, while simultaneously constructing a prerogative state that overrides or circumvents those constraints in the name of necessity, emergency, or national survival. Crucially, the two coexist. 6 and 7, they coexist. One is under the radar through deception, and the other one is what is openly being done, but always being eroded at. And the persistence of legality masks the erosion of liberalism. This is the essence of modern constitutional authoritarianism. Power is not exercised outside the law, but through it. Repression takes bureaucratic rather than overtly brutal form. Elections continue, but are stripped of genuine contestation. The press operates under economic, regulatory, or informal pressure. Courts rule, but increasingly defer. over time, the prerogative state grows within the shell of the normative state until the distinction itself loses meaning. Democratic,
Elaine?
yes,
Yeah, just a question.
sure.
To go back to that last slide.
Right here.
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. Power is not exercised outside the law, but through it. Repression takes bureaucratic rather than overtly brutal form. So I think that was the one. I had a question on it. Because this is something that's happening gradually
Yes, and then it
right now.
becomes fully on display. And at the Sunday Law mark, wherever you mark that, we do know in January 20th, that's when he takes the seat. Um, and I'll get into July maybe in a few minutes, but he does officially take the seat. And now what we're seeing, and I've always understood this from based on an experience in my own life, which I've shared before. My husband was an alcoholic, and we both back in the day drank and partied. So it was very hard for me to try to say he's an alcoholic. And I thought about it when people would talk about alcoholics and alcoholism, I always thought it was a gray area. And the alcoholism that I saw develop became very black and white. It was very clear. And where you might think that a situation is this gray area where you can't see the distinction, there comes a
Yeah.
point in time where now you can see it clearly. And to me, that's what the Sunday Law represents. It's on full display now, and it's on display for a purpose, for the benefit of God's people in the world, and for us, that we might all see clearly, because what is happening is the man of sin is being revealed. And that's a process. And so this process of getting here, it wasn't all Trump. This process took course based on if I understand it, as I understand it, the principles of that faction, that definition of a faction, based on those principles, is how it slowly developed itself to where it was able to find something to latch onto, and then here is Trump. So it's over a period of time when you go back into, because he's referencing here Nazi Germany, and that was over a period of time. And we're going to watch a couple of clips from the movie Nuremberg here in just a minute that'll help kind of set this as well. So democratic decline, therefore, becomes difficult to detect as it unfolds. Citizens are told the system is working, laws are passed. Didn't we always hear that in the last several years? That the system, that democracy has still been withheld, it's still holding. I'm trying to think of different ways I've heard it said, but on the news, you're always hearing that, it's still standing strong, it hasn't failed us. Trying to think of some of the ways that they've described it. But the citizens are told that the system is working, laws are passed, judges preside, ballots are counted, yet each incremental legal change narrows the space for opposition and expands executive discretion. The dual state does not emerge in a single moment. It accreates, is that how that word is? Accreates through a series of small decisions, the politicized appointment, the targeted investigation, the one-off exception that becomes precedent. By the time that the consequences are unmistakable, the transformation is largely complete. So now we can see the consequences fully, and the transformation, it says, is largely complete. I'd say it's complete now, where we're at.
Wouldn't we also say that even at January 6th, when the election, as Trump said, was stolen? I mean, couldn't we see that coming as far as what's even happening now with the election boxes and all the things they're trying to do to take away the vote that's coming in the primary here soon, where people are going to be they won't be able to vote. Even how it all looks, I don't know, but this looks like the plan that Trump's going to try to hang on to where he's at in his position of a dictator.
Yeah, and one statement in that article so far where he talks about, oh, I lost my train of thought on that one. It was what you said. Sorry. Anyways, it does happen over time. It might come to me and I'll bring it up in a minute. I have two clips I want to show. And let me preface it and then go ahead and pause after I preface it, Christine. So these two clips come from the movie Nuremberg, and I don't know if anybody's watched it, but the movie itself is based on the book that the psychiatrist wrote. And I don't know if anybody knows that story, but I'll give a brief little rundown of it. They brought in when it came to the Nazi leaders. We know Hitler was dead, and I think a couple others. And when these Nazi leaders that they had taken in and arrested, I think there was a general consensus that the world wanted them just to be killed. And it was a U.S., I hope I have this part right, a U.S. Supreme Court justice that felt that they should be put on trial. And the trial would be televised. First time ever, a trial would be televised. This is back in 1945, would be televised so that all the world could hear the atrocities that took place. Because up until this time, there were rumors about the concentration camps called death camps and what was taking place, but people heard them only as rumors and did not really necessarily believe it. And so they wanted to do this so that the whole world could see where Hitler began and how it, and what it became. And so this I have two clips. We're going to show this one, and it's the work of the psychiatrist who was brought in to assess these, I think it's 22 of them, assess them to whether or not they are even sane to be able to stand trial. And he looked at it as an opportunity to study real evil. And he saw, and you'll hear it in one of the clips, he saw initially the Germans as something wrong with them. In other words, like discrimination, there's something wrong with them personally, with German people. And he learned that there was nothing, what went on in Germany could happen anywhere. So we'll watch both clips. Go ahead, Christine. So democracy brings forth people that are too weak to be able to handle government, and their initial, in the early stages, their initial goal was to overcome or get rid of the Weimar Republic and turn into this authoritarian rule. And it was done through deception as well that led up to this place. And you had people that did not even know what was going on. The people that were experiencing it obviously knew. Okay, so now we'll do the second one. Go ahead, Christine. Couple of videos.
I wanted to say on your slide, you one of them brought out the prerogative and the normative. And growing up, when my mom would make an authoritarian rule to me, and I'd be, well, that's not right, or that's not fair. And she would say, well, it's my prerogative. And so I was looking up the word, and it's a very interesting word because it fits the authority figures. Let's see, it actually came from the crown, the British crown, and which to me right there is interesting, but it means that a person or a faction would believe they have the right or privilege exclusive to them, that it's a particular class. And it made me think of this elite class that Trump fronts for, right? And how they feel that they're the smartest and most capable of ruling the masses. And when you showed that film, I was also thinking about the tariffs and how the middle class is like pretty much not the middle class anymore, and that these tariffs, these taxes are making everyone really poor. And it's another, and that's what happened in the Weimar Republic. I mean, the people had to like take wheelbarrows of their money to buy like a loaf of bread because it had um, inflated so much, like our money is doing right now, right? You can see that similarity. And also, what's interesting is that Hitler studied what the South did during the Civil War and how the South enslaved people. And Hitler took that template, and that is the template he used that was already done in America by the South. And he used that in order to enslave the people, under his control. He used the very same template. He didn't design it. It came from the American South. I thought that was interesting. And one more point, um, you know, I hadn't thought about it till you showed the film, but I know that the United States took a lot of Nazi scientists and academic intellectual types and brought them over here. A lot. I can't think of the name right now of the one big one that they brought over here that worked in NASA.
Werner
Um,
von Braun.
Thank you, Linda, because not all of them were tried, is what my point was to be. That it's kind of funny that they chose a certain group, sort of the way they always do, where they make people think that they're coming down hard on criminals. Makes me think of Rudy Giuliani when he was working to take down the mob back in the day, and he actually is the mob when you think about it. I mean, they incorporated all those um, syndicate type of plays from that culture. And even the mob info came into the FBI. They were asked into the FBI and CIA. Um, Meyer Lansky and the one that Luciano, who went, he helped them. And so we know that, that mob mentality got into our Secret Service, and I don't know, it just all lots to think about. I really appreciated the study, but I just wanted to bring out a few points that came to my mind.
Hey, hey, Susan,
Yes,
eugenics was also something that he
yes,
studied,
huge.
and
And that's,
Kellogg was part of the eugenics
say
movement.
that one more time. Who?
Kellogg?
Oh, you mean our Kellogg from the Adventist Church?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, that never really disappeared, the eugenics. And Epstein, that was part of what they were all into too, which is, it's very interesting because they all run in the same circles. Um, uh, Epstein and what's his name? That's the Commerce Secretary, Lutnick, Howard Lutnick. They lived right next door to each other. And they were 9 and 11. That was their address. 9 and 11. And Epstein shared a wall with Howard Lutnick. But if you look at how these people are moved around, like William Barr, his dad, Donald Barr, gave Epstein his first job, right, as a teacher in a prestigious private school. I'm not going to go into all the detail. I could, but I'm not going to bore you
Yeah,
with
because
all of
I'll run out of time and I'm
Oh,
hoping to
I'm
finish.
sorry, but the point was that they are all networked. It really is this network that has been working secretly all along the way to get to where we are now. So I just find it really fascinating.
Thank you. And Kathy had her
Thank
hand up
you.
too. Kathy had her hand up too.
I just think it's interesting, like kind of like a alpha omega. Maybe, I don't know. I just want to suggest. So the Federalist Papers were concerned over a faction of the majority. And here we are at this time in history with a faction of minority ruling, which I just find really interesting. It's like the total opposite.
Well, they got enough people to vote for him to win.
Yes, but it's still minority rule. It's still a faction of minority. The people are just drinking the Kool-Aid. And they're a minority, 77 million, I think, voted, but I don't know how many are still there. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting.
So from this movie, I picked up, quite a few things in it as we went along, and it is available. It'll be available on Netflix on March 7th, I believe. It's on Prime now, but you'd have to pay for it. But it was a really interesting look at it. It is the story of based on the writings of the psychiatrist and how he came to assess their condition, and that they were just people that were hungry for power and saw themselves as better than everyone else and used deception as the means to accomplish their goal. And as a reminder, when we go back into that history, is a point that is brought up in the movie, or is in the movie, is when the Supreme Court justice is trying, he's lacking getting support for this trial. So he goes to what seems like a last resort choice to try to get support to the Pope. And he's not a Catholic himself, not necessarily even religious, but he goes to the Pope to ask for their support, and the Pope denies him. And then the Supreme Court justice, he reminds him of his involvement and with Hitler and partnership with Hitler, and how you are just as much to blame for this happening, and that you should help if you want to untarnish the stain that you've put on yourself. Those are my words. But so you had that history where I see it, I as I watched it, I saw it as a glimpse of what we're seeing today, and that we understand, as Elder Tess laid out when it came to the papacy, that the papacy, that at that time she labeled Germany as the king of the north. I think that's, if I say that right. But anyways, the papacy and Germany were connected together to be able for this to develop as it did. And we know that it's not the papacy today, it's the United States. So it gave me a greater glimpse of how we got here today, and how much more relevant the history of the Holocaust is to be able to see what is happening today, if you will see it. So the movie, I read about it months before it was coming out, and was kind of anxious to see it, and all the write-ups on it were talking about how relevant it was at the time it was coming out. And I believe it came out right before the election. Yeah, ICE does wear scary uniforms. So continuing on, this particular article goes through, I kind of want to skip through some of this part to hopefully get to a conclusion that I have on the board that I want to share. So he continues on in this article, or the author continues on in this article, to give different comparisons of similar authoritarian ruling where they do it within the confines of their constitution. So Philippines is one of them. Ferdinand Marcos remains one of the most revealing early cases of this pattern. Elected president in 1965, re-elected in 1969. Marcos confronted rising social unrest, elite fragmentation, and mounting economic pressure. He responded not through overt authoritarian seizure, but through constitutional maneuver, most notably the declaration of martial law in 1972, which was justified as an emergency measure to preserve national order. Martial law did not abolish Philippine democracy, it hollowed it out. Congress was sidelined, independent media was suppressed, and opponents were detained, all under a veneer of legal authority. Courts continue to function, though within sharply narrowed boundaries. Elections were staged and carefully managed. The Constitution remained the regime's shield even as its spirit evaporated. And the relevance of Marco's case lies not in analogy, but in method. The use of legality as instrument, the manipulation of constitutional procedure, the performance of legitimacy, and the entrenchment of elite networks under the banner of national unity. Marcos demonstrated how repression, patronage, and corruption could be cloaked in constitutional language with plebiscites and referendums staged to insist that he was democracy's guardian rather than its gravedigger. And so then he gives a few other examples in history as well, which we won't go into, but he says legality becomes a tool for consolidating power. Pluralism is gradually constricted, sovereignty and national identity are elevated, and institutional restraint. Democratic erosion unfolds as a sequence of tactical adjustments rather than a single decisive break. So when you go back to what Goring said in the clip, that it was they were elected, and it was the democracies, he claimed, that were failing the people, and that they were necessary to come in and take over and get rid of Parliament. No longer would you have this structure. So, and then said that because we were elected, we have a mandate to change, and change they did. They changed it to what they believed things should be, and that was to kill 6 million Jews. So the United States is not immune to these dynamics. Its version is shaped by federalism, polarization, and constitutional system that disperses authority, yet it belongs to the same family of democratic unraveling. Trump's first presidency strained democratic norms. His second has altered American governance more fundamentally. As historian Ruth Ben-Ghiat has observed, Trump's method resembles not the slow erosion typical of elected strongmen, but the rapid consolidation associated with post-coup environments. The insurrection of January 6th, the article said 2020, but that was 2021. The coup attempt, for which Trump has not been held accountable, remains central to this trajectory. The transformation, let's see, I think I want to skip down here. The cumulative effect is a restructuring of the American state within constitutional form. The normative state remains visible. The prerogative state grows alongside it. Executive interpretation increasingly substitutes for legislative intent. Emergency becomes a standing rationale for centralization. Legality becomes an instrument rather than a limit. The NSS does more than redefine American power abroad. It codifies a vision of governance in which national security ceases to be discrete domain and the discrete domain and becomes a lens through which economic life, technology, migration, culture, and social cohesion are understood. It represents a comprehensive act of securitization. This securitization expands presidential interpretive authority, concentrates discretion, and narrows space for dissent by framing disagreements as vulnerability. When nearly everything becomes security, it also becomes subject to executive prerogative. Democratic unraveling is cumulative. It unfolds as norms are rewritten. Institutional boundaries blurred, legality weaponized, emergency normalized, and dissent reframed as vulnerability. The NSS is a document of foreign policy, but it is also a mirror. It reflects not only how the United States sees the world, but how it is remaking its own polity. The concern is not what the strategy claims to defend, but what it reveals the country is becoming. I think that was the end of that article. That was foreign policy as well. So a brief look now with the time that we have left. The kind of tracing states' rights is what I wanted to go through, and because I wanted to know, is that faction, as he defined it, part of where we got, how we got to where we're at today, and how to trace it throughout history. So in the argument for states' rights or individual rights. And remember that the Bill of Rights was written by James Madison and added as a compromise in order to get the Constitution ratified. Not everybody, I don't think myself, my own opinion, and it could be wrong, I don't think everybody that was arguing for the individual rights was wrong or necessarily bad. We may have even done the same thing at the time if we were there. The issue is a group of people that were identified, and that's where the argument lies. A group of people that were identified as those that were adverse to the rights of other citizens. And so I wanted to trace this work of states' rights through history, and I only did a brief overview. 1787 to the 1800s, you had the Anti-Federalists feared a strong central government. We've covered that. The 10th Amendment was created to reserve powers for the states. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions written by Jefferson and Madison argued states could declare federal laws unconstitutional. We'll look at that one a little bit more closely in just a minute. So 1820s to 1860s, you had the nullification and secession. The nullification crisis from 1828 to 1832 arose when South Carolina tries to void federal tariffs. This escalated to the secession crisis in 1860 to 1861. So they're trying to avoid something that the federal government is doing to them. And so where Southern states left the Union to protect slavery, arguing for state sovereignty. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. 1870s to 1930s with the Reconstruction and federal growth. Post-Civil War, the 14th Amendment limited state power to violate rights. However, the Supreme Court restricted federal power in cases like U.S. versus Cruikshank. I think we've looked at that case at some point in the history of this movement, but I don't remember it specifically. The Progressive Era and the New Deal saw a major shift towards federal power, often called cooperative federalism. So in the New Deal history, there's a major shift towards federal power. So the 50s to the 70s, civil rights and resistance. Southern states invoked states' rights to oppose desegregation. So we're looking at this issue of states' rights and where trying to get a glimpse of cause and effect. So the Southern states invoked states' rights to oppose desegregation. And that's Brown v. Board of Education. That one has been broadly taught in this movement. The Supreme Court largely rejected these arguments, strengthening federal civil rights enforcement. So there's a change that's going to take place in the 80s, and actually beginning back in the 70s, referring to new federalism. So I thought this was important because the question was brought up when we were going through this in the mornings, because isn't it the Federalist Society where you have Project 2025 come out of, and where the Supreme Court justices they have their list. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong. So there's
Yes,
a
you're correct.
difference. Okay, so there's a difference between the Federalist in the history that we're looking at and then Federalists today. So it is referred to as new federalism and then you have modern disputes. New federalism aimed to return power to the states. And this actually began with Nixon, which would be pre-80s. So some of those modern battles involved healthcare, states challenging the Affordable Care Act, and then drug policy, state legalization of marijuana conflicting with federal law. Immigration, this would be both, because this wouldn't be the conservatives wanting to legalize marijuana. That would be your Democrats wanting to legalize. So it affects both sides, and both sides use it. Immigration, state efforts to pass their own border regulations, bypassing federal authority. So this one goes on to this first one here that we're going to look at, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. They were political statements drafted in 1798 and 1799, in which the Kentucky and Virginia legislators took the position that the Federal Alien and Sedition Act were unconstitutional. The resolutions argued that the states had the right and the duty to declare unconstitutional those acts of Congress that the Constitution did not authorize. So again, it's showing, if I understand this correctly, that Congress is beneath the the central government or the Constitution. And so, but they had the right, if the Constitution didn't authorize something, they had the right to take that. They could declare unconstitutional those acts of Congress that the Constitution did not authorize. I hope I said that right. Hopefully you're reading along with me. In doing so, they argued for states' rights and strict construction of the construction. So here is, it says it here, Jefferson and Madison, who are Federalists, they are also arguing states' rights. They argue for states' rights and strict construction of the Constitution. The Kentucky-Virginia resolutions of 1798 were written secretly by Jefferson and Madison.
So what was it about? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
What was it about the, if you could go back to the other slide. Oh, the Sedition Act. What was it that they opposed about it? Because isn't that the one where the president can declare an emergency and use the military against the citizens?
I think so. I didn't go that far into it for this study, and I got that eraser behind my head.
Yeah.
So
okay.
my purpose in it was also to show, and it's an area that I need to look back into, but it was just to show that here you have the Federalists even that are also arguing using states' rights arguments for things when it came to the Constitution. So it eventually established that they did have the right to nullify things that were not authorized by the Constitution. I hope I said that right. The resolutions argued that the states had the right and the duty to declare unconstitutional those acts of Congress that the Constitution did not authorize. So they're actually using states' rights, which I didn't want to leave us and give the impression that that all the Federalists were anti-states' rights, because we understand, as we've talked before, that Madison himself is the one that wrote the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and they were included as a compromise. But I'm left with, were they necessary? Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay. So the principles stated in the resolutions became known as the Principles of 98. Adherents argued that the states could judge the constitutionality of federal government laws and decrees. The Kentucky resolutions of 1798 argue that each individual state has the power to declare that federal laws are unconstitutional and void. The Kentucky resolution of 1799 added that when the states determine that a law is unconstitutional, nullification by the states is the proper remedy. So it has to be able to show that the law is unconstitutional. The Virginia resolutions of 1798 refer to interposition to express the idea that the states have a right to interpose to prevent harm caused by unconstitutional laws.
Question. If the state does that, would it have to go to the Supreme Court?
I would think so yes, because we see that is what's happened as we've progressed through in our own history. We've watched them. And we also touched on, I didn't have it in the slides, but the transcript from Elder Parmenter's presentations in 2021 on the 14th Amendment, where he points out that it points out specifically that the far right and how they use states' rights and the amendments, the Bill of Rights in particular, the 14th Amendment, how they have used that, and he used the word bait, to bait the people so that people get the idea that something is being taken away from them. They're losing a right and someone else is getting a right that is theirs and not to the other person. So how they have manipulated those rights and used them for their favor to oppress. Did that make sense?
Yeah, so that's why your question, and it really is a question in your mind, I'm thinking, that were the Bill of Rights necessary? Am I correct?
Yeah,
Are you still kind of like now mulling that over?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to say they weren't necessary, but they definitely played a role in how we got to where we're at today, in how they were used and manipulated to be used. So, so I don't want to say that the Constitution was well and done all by itself without them. I don't know. I don't feel like I know enough to say that, but we can look through the history and see how they used those individual rights, in particular the 14th Amendment, to their gain.
And that was one of the arguments too that you read. I can't remember if it was Hamilton or Madison in your presentation that argued against the Bill of Rights because it was too much like they had experienced in Europe, right, with the kingly rule over the peasants. And the king had a Bill of Rights for the peasantry class.
Yeah. Okay, I lost my place. Did
Can
I
I make
finish
a
reading the
comment,
slide?
Elaine?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for the studies. You're prompting us to relook at American history. But I just wanted to say that the Constitution, if you listen to Elder Parmender's Constitution 101, it was the North Star. It was like a fixed document where we're supposed to evolve like as a policy and not a, he said it was both a policy and a principle. And we can see God's intervention here in his study of South Africa. He mentions how God tried to intervene in the Sixth Kingdom. And you can see in the work of James Madison, in trying to make a government where, it represented for the people versus what they had in Europe. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And as I've been reading over this for the past few months, I saw a parallel to this movement and thought, what a miracle that despite slavery going on and the log in their own eye, their basis was on monarchy as being tyranny instead of seeing their own tyranny. But what a miracle it was that they were managing to put together a government that was supposed to be protective of the people. But they traced through a lot of history to see the failures of many different types of government to come to that place. So yes, correct. I understood that as what Elder Parmenter said as well, that the Constitution is good, the Ship of Alexandria is good, and the institution, he more, I'm lacking the right word to say, whereas Elder Tess had said it was the United States and the institution was the United States and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, he more, I don't want to say redefined it, but brought it down to the Constitution as principles, as you said, and policy and through methodology. So they were putting together something quite amazing. And despite who they were and what their lives existed as elites and slaveholders and all that. And so as the North Star, Obama is actually one that made that comment, was the North Star, that it was to evolve into a perfect union. And that would have to be to rid all oppression, all areas of oppression, which would start with slavery. So, okay, so adherents argued that the states could judge the constitutionality of federal government laws and decrees. The Kentucky Resolution of 1798 argued that individual state has the power to declare that federal laws are unconstitutional and void. And the Kentucky Resolution of 1799, maybe I did read all this one, added that when the states determine that a law is unconstitutional, nullification by the state is the proper remedy. The Virginia Resolutions of 1798 refer to interposition to express the idea of the states have a right to interpose to prevent harm caused by unconstitutional laws. So if you take that Kansas example that he gives, when they imprisoned this just turned 18-year-old for 17 years, I think it was, they imprisoned him for like 17 or 18 years. And he had just turned 18 and had consensual oral sex with his same-sex partner. And they had laws that were oppressing people, and they were trying to get their constitution to fit their laws. So the Virginia, and that was recent. This is talking about the past history. The Virginia resolutions contemplated joint action by the states. I think I'm going to skip past this because, and you have the notes, so if you want to go back and read some of these things, because I want to get to, if I have a few extra minutes, I hope to show the diagrams that I've kind of put together to demonstrate this, how I see it. And again, new federalism focuses on devolving power from federal government to the states. So while the federal government or the Constitution gave a strong central government, it was and it actually goes on to say that it actually begins in Nixon, this devolving of power, taking from the federal and giving it back into the hands of the states. That it's characterized by intense, ongoing, and partisan battles over jurisdiction and policy, like healthcare, education, social issues. Supreme Court rulings, example here is Lopez, increased state level policy experimentation and disputes over federal preemption define this period's struggles with power shifting between centralized mandates and state autonomy. So they're starting to shift the power and put some of that power back into the states, from the federal to the states. It's a political philosophy and devolution or the transfer of certain powers from the United States federal government back to the states. The primary objective of the new federalism, unlike that of the 18th century political philosophy of federalism, is the restoration of some of the autonomy and power which individual states had lost due to the federal government as a result of FDR here's New Deal policies. Many of these ideas of new federalism originated with Richard Nixon. So it began and then was carried on. Like I say, you have the notes, so if you want to read some of these individual things that I had in there. So here's a little bit of a diagram of a hierarchical organization. The Articles of Confederation we saw established a weak, decentralized league of friendship where sovereign states held most power, featuring a unicameral. I gotta say that I need Susan to help me with my words. So it was in other words, a single Congress. It didn't have House and Senate, with no executive or judicial branches. No power to tax, no authority to regulate commerce, in contrast to hierarchical structure like the Constitution. This particular one is referring to the Constitution as this hierarchical structure, creates a strong central government with separated powers, executive, legislative, and judicial, that can directly govern citizens and override state laws. Remember, the states didn't want their laws to be overridden. So the question that I have that has come to my mind as I've read not just Federalist number 10, but probably about a third of them that I've gone through, is when I started to see the miracle that it must have taken in their minds to actually to do what they did, what they were attempting to set up, and then had to battle to do it. Was it good or bad? Is it right or wrong? And I started to question the organization of this movement. Because we see, if you go back to Germany 2 years ago in Germany, I believe it was, when people were considering, and the discussion was going on in the camp meeting about expressing their views on, why don't we get to vote our leaders? Why do you choose why are our leaders chosen? Why don't we get the opportunity to vote? And I took that as a bit of a, I guess, an unhappiness, I don't know, of how this structure is being set up. And I started to really consider I don't know if burden is the right word for it, but what is on the shoulders of Elder Parmenter, because he's the appointed leader, and yet it's God that's leading. And to me, I always saw it as that way, and that we trust. For me, I saw it as trust in the movement. And even if I don't agree with everything, I'm not saying I don't, but I said if there are things that I don't understand, I would need to study them more to understand them. But in trusting the structure that God is leading, there are many examples in the Bible of God's leading, and I always like the stories of Joshua. And when Michael comes on, is he referred to Michael in that chapter? I can't remember. But comes and and has this conversation with Joshua. And then also where I think it's when referring to Moses, where the people are having the to decide who are they going to stand with. And so there's a lot of examples in the Bible of God is going to put a human in that leadership role. And are the people going to trust them or are they not? And I think it's with Joshua where it said Joshua told the people, or maybe it was Moses, what they needed to know. Didn't tell them more than what they needed to know, but what they needed to know. And can we trust? And I started thinking about, wow, that's really hard for humanity to trust like that. It really can be a challenge for us. And then also you take it externally in trying to trust these leaders that were setting up this Constitution. How can we put our faith in that? And then I would also balance that with what a work they were tasked to do and were trying to do and having to fight to get it done against the opposition. But I liked Federalist number 10 because it singled out, while the others are very informative with different topics. I like how he singled out the faction and defined it to a specific group and wanted to understand that group. So do we trust the organization of this movement? And who is leading this hierarchical organization? We also understand that God is overruling all things. We read that yesterday in the very first quotes that I have in the study. And they're so you have the notes if you want to go back to those quotes. So did ancient Israel trust Moses, and who was leading? It was God that was leading. So I put together a couple of just my view on this and trying to think it through as a visual, because I'm more visual than reading sometimes, but I needed to read a lot in order to develop the visual. So while I have Elder Parmenter's name in here, we understand it to be that God is the one that is leading, but God has chosen a human to be to do this leading and the work of organization to put it together. So if you have all these, you have the elders and then the various ministries. I gave two views of it. One of them with the movement if you were to look at this as the Constitution, the principles of the Constitution, or the principles of God's character of love and as looking out for the whole, looking out for all the people, and the work that must entail to bring all these various different ideas, as we've watched when Elder Tess gave all of her studies, and we watched all these different ideas, and we would hear stories of someone being raped and I know that was on a public message that was shared, that all these various horrific things that were happening, and a lot of people were fighting the equality and women's rights, and how to bring that all together, and then to the point that no one is forced but allowed to choose, if that made sense. Or if we take this flipped version of it, and you have if you could see these as states, now you have all these states and rights and individual rights, and they're now going to have their own individual way, and you have the leader underneath all these different individual ideas and ways. That's how I viewed it in my head to try to process. So I don't know if it makes sense to you, but that's how it made sense to me. And then I did the same thing with, say, a church. You can do the same thing. You have to have some sort of basic, Kathy, what's it called in a board? Bylaws? Is that what you would say? Bylaws?
That govern the board?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there has to be some basic principle that operates under that all can come to agreement on, and then you work within those principles. So this is the structure here of what it was intended to be. We're not going to read all of it, but just looking at the simple structure of the Constitution at the top, it's not a person, it's what it represented. When it comes to the preamble being said that it was the key of the Constitution, while it says we the people being the key, and some would question, well, okay, who's we the people? But look at what it was to provide. It was supposed to be governing all the laws that would be written through Congress off of these principles of the Constitution. And that would be to look out for the greater whole, and which should then in progression lead them to see the log in their eye of slavery and women and so on and so forth. But every step of the way, you have people resisting and fighting against certain people having rights every step of the way, which I just think that's crazy. That's humanity. Every step of the way, there are people that are fighting it against allowing somebody to have rights as they have, and feel that somebody else, they should deserve rights and somebody else should be denied. And it's crazy, but that is what it is. And he said that it was sown within the human nature, and then our biases would cause us to oppress other people. Short paraphrase of a couple of the slides. So the Constitution would be over and above the legislative branch. This is where you're going to have your laws, et cetera, and all that's underneath it. And the president himself was to be under this Constitution as it was drafted. And then you have the judicial branch and everything else underneath it. So this was the unitary system that was referenced earlier. You have a federation, which is what the Constitution is. It's the people, and then the states, and then the national government. Authority is divided between central and state governments and is derived from the people. And that would be Canada, India, the United States. This one here, this unitary system, this is the one that Bill Barr brought up to say, and this is where we're sitting at now, is you have the national government, or you have literally one person that is setting up a system to work that is based on this one person. And we saw that in the article we read, and also if you read the World Health Organization one that he read, that was written, that was posted in the media broadcast as well. And then the other one I read during the night when I couldn't sleep was the what was the title of it? The one on Epstein and the Boys Club. The Boys Club, just horrific talk about how the same talk that they gave when it came to African American people, that they're not capable of learning, they're not capable of. I watched a little bit of a documentary on the NFL when it came to allowing African Americans to be quarterbacks. They did not allow them to be quarterbacks because quarterbacks were required to be able to think and process and make decisions. And they didn't view African American people capable, which is absolutely wrong. And the same thing you read in this article on the Epstein and the Boys Club is that women just aren't capable. And it's heartbreaking and horrific that is this behind the scenes world that is now slowly being displayed. And what, I don't know if Olivine's with us, but what Olivine brought up the other day when we went through this was Aaron's comments on I'm sorry, I'm hurrying, Kathy. Aaron's comments on the exposure of Donald Trump, because that's how I've seen it, is that the Epstein files are kind of going in like the story of Achan. Person by person, you're seeing the dominoes fall, and they're going to land to where you get to the Nuremberg trials, where the purpose of the Nuremberg trials was to put it before the whole world so that everybody can now clearly see it's fully exposed. And I see that in the Epstein files, it'll be fully exposed, and that'll be what turns the people finally on Donald Trump. So with that, I think I'll end it. I hope that was somewhat helpful, at least encouraging to read a few more of the Federalist Papers, just to try to get a feel for what it is that they were trying to do. And defective as they were, there was a good work that was going on. Wasn't the work of the good woman, it was just the Sixth Kingdom doing the job that it was supposed to do, set up a situation to protect the people. And it failed. We see that it failed. So I ran way over time, and I apologize. So I'll go ahead and close in prayer, and so we can take a quick break. Almighty God in heaven, we thank you for the blessing and the privilege of your guidance, your goodness, your mercy, your watch care, and the light that you've shined in our path to help us to be able to look at some of these histories and have a little bit better eye and discernment to understand the origin of the setup of this nation. I pray that you would help us to continue looking at this study and continue looking at the Federalist Papers and try to come to our own conclusions as to where we're at today and what brought us there. We thank you for this blessing to come together, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.